The blast of gunfire echoed through the bustling town of Willow Creek as Rebecca Collins ducked behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't the welcome she'd expected after traveling 3 weeks by stagecoach to this remote corner of Wyoming territory in 1878. "Keep your head down, miss," a deep voice commanded from somewhere to her left. Rebecca pressed herself flat against the wooden building, her amber-colored travel dress already caked with dust. She'd come west with dreams of independence, accepting a position as the town's new schoolteacher, but now found herself caught in what appeared to be a shootout on her very first day. When the gunfire finally ceased, Rebecca cautiously raised her head to see a tall man holstering his revolver. He wore a weathered Stetson hat pulled low over his eyes, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing tanned forearms, and well-worn leather chaps over his denim pants. "You can come out now, madam. Those troublemakers have moved on," he said, extending a hand to help her up. "Thank you," Rebecca replied, attempting to brush the dust from her skirts. "I'm Rebecca Collins, the new schoolteacher." "Blake Harrington," he responded with a slight tip of his hat, "sheriff around these parts." His face was sun-weathered and serious, but his blue eyes held a kindness that contrasted with his otherwise stern appearance. "Some welcome to Willow Creek," Rebecca said, attempting to lighten the mood despite her still racing pulse. "Not our usual greeting, I assure you," Sheriff Harrington replied with the hint of a smile. "The Bradford gang's been causing trouble all through the territory. We've been expecting them." "Well, I certainly wasn't," Rebecca said, finally noticing the small crowd that had gathered after the excitement. "I should find my way to the schoolhouse. I was told accommodation would be arranged." "That's right." "The school board's fixed up the rooms above the schoolhouse for you." Sheriff Harrington nodded, then gestured to a young deputy nearby. "Colton here can help with your bags and show you the way." As Rebecca followed the young deputy down the dusty main street, she couldn't help but glance back at the sheriff, who was now addressing a group of concerned townspeople. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident but not arrogant, strong yet gentle, that intrigued her. "Sheriff's a good man," the deputy commented, noticing her gaze. "Widowed 3 years now, raises his little girl all on his own." Rebecca nodded politely but said nothing. She hadn't come west looking for romance or gossip. After breaking off her engagement to a wealthy banker's son in Boston, a man who expected her to give up her dreams of teaching, Rebecca had sworn to focus solely on her career. Her parents had been devastated by her decision, believing she'd thrown away her one chance at a respectable life, but Rebecca refused to be another ornament in someone's parlor. The schoolhouse was a simple but sturdy wooden building at the edge of town, with large windows to let in plenty of light. The upstairs rooms were clean and more spacious than Rebecca had expected. A desk, a small bookshelf, a cast-iron stove, and a bed with a colorful quilt occupied the main room, while a smaller room held a washbasin and chamber pot. "It's not fancy," the deputy apologized, setting down her trunk. "It's perfect," Rebecca assured him, already envisioning how she would arrange her books and personal items. "When do classes begin?" "Monday morning. You've got 3 days to settle in. Town's excited to have a proper teacher again. Last one left after a year." "Well, I plan to stay much longer," Rebecca said confidently, though a small voice in her head wondered if she truly belonged in this rugged frontier town. After the deputy left, Rebecca unpacked her trunk, placing her modest collection of books on the shelf. She changed from her travel dress into something simpler and decided to explore the schoolroom downstairs. The classroom contained rows of wooden benches, a large chalkboard, and a teacher's desk at the front. It was humble compared to the school where she'd trained in Boston, but it had potential. As Rebecca was examining the reading primers left by the previous teacher, a sound at the door made her turn. A small girl with blonde braids tied with blue ribbons stood there, watching her with curious eyes. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. "Hello there," Rebecca said, smiling warmly. The girl tilted her head, studying Rebecca intently before asking, "Are you the new teacher?" I am. My name is Miss Collins, and who might you be? I'm Sarah Harrington. The girl stepped into the room, her calico dress swishing around her ankles. Pa says you're from Boston and you know lots of things. Your father is the sheriff, Rebecca asked, making the connection immediately. Sarah nodded, approaching Rebecca's desk with growing confidence. He said I should wait until Monday to meet you, but I wanted to see if you were nice. Rebecca laughed, charmed by the child's directness. And what's your verdict? I think you're pretty, and you talk fancy. Sarah ran her finger along the edge of the desk. Can you teach me to talk fancy too? I can teach you proper grammar if that's what you mean, Rebecca replied, amused. But there's nothing wrong with the way you speak now. Sarah shrugged. Mrs. Miller says I need refinement. She looks after me when Pa's busy. Well, there's more to learning than just refinement, Rebecca said. Do you like to read? Sarah's face lit up. Pa reads to me every night. We're reading Robinson Crusoe now, but some words are too big. That's quite an advanced book for someone your age, Rebecca said, impressed. Pa says I'm smart like my ma was, Sarah said matter-of-factly. She died when I was 4. I'm very sorry to hear that, Rebecca said softly. It's okay, I don't remember her much, Sarah replied with the straightforward acceptance that children sometimes have about tragic events. Pa keeps her picture by his bed. Rebecca wasn't sure how to respond, but was saved from having to do so when Sheriff Harrington's deep voice called from outside. Sarah, where have you gone off to now? I'm in here, Pa, Sarah called back, meeting the new teacher. The sheriff appeared in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. When he saw Rebecca, he removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair with a slight wave to it. Miss Collins, I apologize if my daughter is bothering you. Sarah has a habit of making herself at home wherever she goes. She's no bother at all, Sheriff, Rebecca assured him. We were just getting acquainted. Blake Harrington's stern expression softened as he looked at his daughter. Still, you know better than to barge in on folks without an invitation, Sarah. I didn't barge, Pa. I knocked, but Miss Collins didn't hear me because she was looking at books. The sheriff gave Rebecca an apologetic look. She has an answer for everything. A sign of an inquisitive mind, Rebecca said with a smile. She'll do well in school. That's what I'm counting on, Sheriff Harrington replied. Come on, Sarah, let's let Miss Collins settle in. You'll see her plenty come Monday. Sarah sighed dramatically but obeyed, moving to her father's side. Will you be at the welcome supper tomorrow night, Miss Collins, Mrs. Peterson makes the best apple pie in the territory. Welcome supper? Rebecca asked, looking from the girl to her father. The sheriff cleared his throat. The town arranges a small gathering whenever new folks arrive, especially someone as important as the schoolteacher. It's at the church at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, nothing fancy. That sounds lovely, I'll be there, Rebecca said, touched by the gesture. Good, Sarah exclaimed. You can sit by us. Sarah, her father warned, but there was affection in his tone. We should go. I still need to finish my rounds, and you're supposed to be helping Mrs. Miller with the mending. Nice to meet you, Miss Collins, Sarah said, giving a small curtsy that made Rebecca smile. You as well, Sarah. I look forward to having you in my class. As they left, Rebecca noticed how gentle Sheriff Harrington was with his daughter, his large hand resting protectively on her small shoulder. For a man who had just engaged in a shootout hours earlier, he showed remarkable tenderness with his child. Despite her resolve to focus solely on teaching, Rebecca couldn't help but feel a twinge of admiration for this man who balanced duty and fatherhood in such a difficult environment. The next day, Rebecca spent the morning organizing the classroom and reviewing the curriculum materials left by her predecessor. The afternoon was dedicated to exploring the small town, which consisted mainly of a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, a small bank, and various other shops and services essential to frontier life. The people she met were friendly, if a bit curious about the educated woman from the East. At the general store, Rebecca purchased some basic supplies and introduced herself to the storekeeper's wife, Martha Peterson, a round-faced woman with a perpetual smile. We're so pleased to have you in Willow Creek, Miss Collins, Mrs. Peterson said as she wrapped Rebecca's purchases in brown paper. The children have been running wild without proper schooling these past 6 months. I'm looking forward to the challenge, Rebecca replied honestly. Sheriff Harrington's been especially keen on getting a new teacher here, Mrs. Peterson continued, a knowing look in her eye. His Sarah is sharp as a tack that one needs proper guidance, though, growing up without a mother. She seems like a wonderful child, Rebecca said, deliberately ignoring the woman's obvious attempt to spark interest in the sheriff's situation. Oh, she is. The sheriff does his best, but a man can only do so much, especially one with such dangerous work. Mrs. Peterson leaned forward slightly. The whole town's been hoping he'd find himself a suitable wife, for Sarah's sake as much as his own. I'm sure when the time is right, he will, Rebecca replied diplomatically, accepting her parcels. Thank you for your help, Mrs. Peterson. I'll see you at the supper this evening. As Rebecca walked back to the schoolhouse, she pondered the conversation. It was clear the town saw Sheriff Harrington as a prime marriage prospect, and they'd likely view any single woman in the same light. She would need to establish herself as the schoolteacher first and foremost, not as a potential wife for the widowed sheriff. The welcome supper at the church that evening was a lively affair. It seemed the entire town had turned out to meet her. Rebecca wore her best dress, a deep green with modest lace trim that complemented her auburn hair, which she'd arranged in a simple but elegant updo. She was introduced to so many people that she feared she'd never remember all their names, but she did her best to appear confident and approachable. As promised, Sarah waved enthusiastically from a table where she sat with her father, who looked distinctly more comfortable in his role as sheriff than as a social dinner guest. His usual gun belt was absent, replaced by a simple leather belt, and he wore a clean white shirt with a dark vest. Miss Collins, I saved you a seat, Sarah called out, patting the bench beside her. Rebecca made her way over, aware of the interested gazes following her progress. Thank you, Sarah, that's very thoughtful of you. Evening, Miss Collins, Sheriff Harrington said, standing politely as she approached. Without his hat, Rebecca noticed his hair had a slight wave to it, and there were crinkles at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious demeanor implied. Sheriff Harrington, she acknowledged with a nod. Thank you both for the invitation to join you. Sarah's idea, he clarified quickly, but you're welcome, of course. The meal was abundant and delicious, with platters of fried chicken, ham, potatoes, cornbread, and various vegetables grown in local gardens. Rebecca found conversation with the sheriff easier than expected. Though not highly educated, he was intelligent and well-spoken, with thoughtful opinions on a variety of subjects. How did you come to be in law enforcement, Sheriff Harrington? Rebecca asked as they enjoyed slices of Mrs. Peterson's famous apple pie. Started as a deputy in Colorado, he replied. Moved up here after the war. This town needed someone to keep the peace, and I needed somewhere quiet to raise Sarah after her mother passed. It must be difficult, balancing your duties with raising a daughter. He glanced at Sarah, who was happily chatting with other children at the far end of the table. It has its challenges, but the town helps. Folks look out for each other here. That's one thing I already appreciate about Willow Creek, Rebecca said sincerely. Everyone has been so welcoming. Small towns can be curious about newcomers, Blake warned. Especially, he stopped himself, especially unmarried female teachers from the East. Rebecca finished for him, raising an eyebrow, a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Something like that. I'm aware of how I must appear to them, Rebecca said, but I came west to teach, not to find a husband. I had enough marriage prospects in Boston. Yet you left them behind. I left behind the expectation that a woman's only purpose is to be a wife and mother, Rebecca clarified. I have nothing against marriage itself when it's based on mutual respect and understanding. Blake studied her for a moment before nodding. That's a fair view, though out here, life's hard enough that most folks can't afford to be too particular about such things. Perhaps. But I'd rather face life's hardships on my own terms than surrender my independence for comfort, Rebecca replied, surprised by her own candor. The sheriff's expression was unreadable, but there was a new respect in his eyes. You've got grit, Miss Collins. You'll need it for some of these youngsters. The evening continued pleasantly, with music provided by a local fiddler and several townspeople taking turns singing or reciting poems. Rebecca was asked to read a selection from one of her favorite books, and she chose a passage from Little Women that seemed to resonate with many of the women present. As the gathering wound down, Rebecca found herself genuinely touched by the community's effort to make her feel welcome. Sheriff Harrington and Sarah walked her back to the schoolhouse under a canopy of stars more brilliant than any she'd ever seen in Boston. "The sky seems so much closer out here," Rebecca remarked, gazing upward. "That's because there's nothing between us and heaven but air," Sarah said wisely, swinging her hand in her father's as they walked. Blake chuckled. "Where did you hear that?" Mr. Turner told me. "He knows all about stars because he stays up all night watching them." "Mr. Turner drinks all night at the saloon, which is why he sees stars," Blake corrected gently. Rebecca laughed, and the sound carried in the quiet night air. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt this relaxed and content. When they reached the schoolhouse, Rebecca turned to thank them for their company. "I hope your first class goes well on Monday," Blake said. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." "I will, thank you, Sheriff Blake," he said, surprising her. "When I'm not wearing the badge, it's just Blake." "Blake," she repeated, aware of a subtle shift between them. "Good night, and good night to you too, Sarah." "Good night, Miss Collins," Sarah replied cheerfully. "I'll bring you a flower on Monday for your desk." Rebecca watched them walk away, the tall, solid figure of the man and the small, skipping form of his daughter, before entering her new home. As she prepared for bed, she found herself wondering about Blake Harrington's late wife and the life they'd shared. What kind of woman had she been? And why did Rebecca care so much about a man she'd only just met? Monday morning arrived with the excitement and nerves that accompanied the first day of school. Rebecca woke early, dressed in a practical blue dress with a white lace collar, and arranged her hair in a simple but neat style. She wanted to appear professional but approachable to her students. The schoolroom was ready, with fresh chalk on the ledge, clean slates at each desk, and Rebecca's own books arranged neatly on the shelf behind her desk. At precisely 8 o'clock, she rang the bell that hung outside the schoolhouse door, signaling the start of the school term. Children began arriving in groups of 2s and 3s, some accompanied by parents eager to meet the new teacher. Rebecca greeted each child by name, having studied the school register extensively, and answered parents' questions with calm assurance. By 8:30, 22 students ranging in age from 6 to 16 were seated at the desks. Sarah Harrington arrived just as Rebecca was about to close the door, clutching a small bunch of wildflowers. "I'm sorry I'm almost late," she said breathlessly. "Pa and I had to help Mr. Jenkins with his cow. She got stuck in the creek mud." "You're not late at all," Rebecca assured her, accepting the slightly wilted flowers with genuine pleasure. "Thank you for these. They'll look lovely on my desk." Sarah beamed and took her seat near the front of the class, smoothing her dress importantly. The morning proceeded better than Rebecca had anticipated. After introducing herself and establishing some basic rules, she assessed the children's various educational levels. As expected, their abilities varied widely. Some of the older boys, clearly expected to help with ranch work, had spotty attendance records and significant gaps in their education. The youngest children were eager but restless, unused to sitting still for long periods. Sarah, however, proved to be as bright as her father had claimed. She read fluidly, calculated sums quickly, and asked thoughtful questions. Her enthusiasm was infectious, helping to engage some of the more reluctant learners. By noon, when Rebecca dismissed the children for lunch, she felt cautiously optimistic about the year ahead. Most of the students returned to their homes for the midday meal, but a few, including Sarah, had brought food in small pails. "Pa made biscuits and ham," Sarah told Rebecca proudly as they sat on the schoolhouse steps. "He's not as good a cook as Ma was, but he tries real hard." "It looks delicious," Rebecca said sincerely. She had made herself a simple lunch of bread and cheese from the supplies she'd purchased at the general store. "Don't you have anyone to cook for you, Miss Collins?" Sarah asked innocently. "I cook for myself," Rebecca explained. "Though I admit I'm not very skilled at it yet." Sarah considered this information seriously. "Maybe you and Pa could teach each other. He knows some things and you know some things, and then you'd both know more things." Rebecca couldn't help but smile at the child's simple logic. "That's an interesting suggestion, but I think your father and I are both quite busy with our respective duties." Sarah shrugged, taking a bite of her biscuit. "Pa says there's always time for important things if you make them important." The afternoon session was dedicated to geography and history, with Rebecca using maps and stories to capture the children's imagination. She described the great cities of the East, the sprawling Mississippi River, and the ancient civilizations of Europe and Asia. The children listened with rapt attention, especially when she connected these distant places to their own experiences in the West. As the day came to a close, Rebecca felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was exactly what she had come west to do, to open young minds to the wider world, to instill a love of learning that might transcend the limitations of frontier life. The children filed out at the end of the day, many lingering to ask questions or simply to smile shyly at their new teacher. Sarah was the last to leave, helping Rebecca clean the chalkboard and straighten the desks. "Pa says I should walk straight home after school," Sarah informed her. "He's probably waiting for me." "That's good advice," Rebecca agreed. "It'll be getting dark earlier soon." "Will you be scared staying here all alone at night?" Sarah asked with concern. Rebecca smiled, touched by the girl's worry. "No, I'll be just fine. The town is very safe, thanks to your father." Sarah nodded seriously. "Pa keeps all the bad men away. Except sometimes they come anyway, like when you first got here." "That was unfortunate timing," Rebecca agreed, "but everything turned out all right." After Sarah left, Rebecca spent another hour preparing lessons for the next day. As she worked, she found her thoughts drifting to Blake Harrington. There was something undeniably appealing about the quiet strength he projected, the gentle way he treated his daughter, and the respect he commanded without arrogance. Rebecca firmly redirected her thoughts. She was here to teach, not to indulge in romantic fantasies about the local sheriff, no matter how intriguing he might be. With renewed determination, she focused on her lesson plans until the fading light made it difficult to continue. The weeks that followed fell into a pleasant routine. Rebecca's days were filled with teaching, and she found genuine fulfillment in watching her students' progress. The evenings were spent grading assignments, preparing lessons, and occasionally joining community events. She became a regular at Sunday church services and often stayed for the communal meals afterward. Blake Harrington remained a constant presence in the periphery of her life. They exchanged greetings when they crossed paths in town, and occasionally had longer conversations when he came to collect Sarah from school. Rebecca learned that he had fought for the Union in the Civil War, had prospected for gold in Colorado before becoming a lawman, and read extensively despite his limited formal education. One crisp October afternoon, as golden leaves drifted from the cottonwood trees that lined the creek, Rebecca was reading under one such tree when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Blake riding toward her on his chestnut gelding. "Afternoon, Miss Collins," he called, tipping his hat. "Enjoying the fine weather. Indeed I am, Sheriff," she replied, marking her place in her book as he dismounted. "Is something wrong in town?" "No, nothing like that." He secured his horse to a low branch and approached, hands resting lightly on his gun belt. "Was making my rounds and saw you sitting here. Thought I'd check that you're all right. As you can see, I'm perfectly fine, just enjoying some Emerson." She held up her book. "Never read him myself," Blake admitted, settling on a nearby rock. "Any good? He has some fascinating thoughts on self-reliance and the importance of thinking independently," Rebecca said. "I suspect you'd find him interesting." "Maybe you could lend me the book sometime," Blake suggested, surprising her. "I'd be happy to, though I warn you, he can be quite philosophical." "I've got more time for reading than you might think. Quiet nights in the sheriff's office when Sarah's asleep." He glanced at the book again. "What made you choose teaching?" Most women I know either marry young or take up something like nursing or shopkeeping. Rebecca considered the question. I've always loved learning. And I believe education is the key to progress, especially in places like Willow Creek, where children might otherwise never learn about the wider world. She paused, then added, My father wanted me to marry a banker's son in Boston. The man was kind enough, but he expected me to give up teaching. I couldn't do it, Blake nodded slowly. Must have taken courage to leave everything familiar behind. Less courage than determination, Rebecca admitted. I sometimes wonder if it was selfish of me. Selfish, Blake raised an eyebrow. Seems to me the selfish thing would have been marrying a man you didn't love just for comfort and security. Rebecca felt a flush of pleasure at his understanding. That's exactly how I saw it, though my parents disagreed. Parents often want what's safe for their children, not necessarily what's right, Blake said thoughtfully. I worry about that with Sarah sometimes, want her to be safe, but I also want her to be strong to follow her own path. She's lucky to have a father who understands that balance, Rebecca said sincerely. Blake looked momentarily uncomfortable with the compliment. I do my best. Speaking of Sarah, she's been going on about some kind of special project you've assigned. Rebecca smiled. Yes, each student is researching the history of a different state. Sarah chose New York because, in her words, it has the most interesting buildings. Ah, that explains why she's been asking me to find her a picture of something called the Brooklyn Bridge. He shook his head with an amused expression. Not exactly common reading material in Willow Creek. I have a book with an illustration of it, Rebecca offered. I can bring it tomorrow. She'd be thrilled. Blake stood, brushing dust from his pants. I should continue my rounds. Town council's concerned about possible cattle rustling in the area. Is that dangerous? Rebecca asked, suddenly aware of how isolated the area around Willow Creek can be. Rustlers don't like being caught. He must have noticed her concerned expression because he added, Don't worry, Miss Collins, I've dealt with worse. As he mounted his horse, Rebecca called up to him, Blake. He looked down, surprised by her use of his first name. Please be careful. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a hint of warmth that made Rebecca's heart beat a little faster. Always am, Rebecca, he replied, using her given name for the first time before tipping his hat and riding away. Rebecca remained by the creek long after Blake had disappeared from view, her book forgotten in her lap. The ease with which they had conversed, the natural flow of ideas between them, stirred emotions she had been determinedly ignoring. There was an undeniable connection developing between them, but Rebecca reminded herself of the complications such feelings could bring. Her position as the town's teacher required a certain decorum, and romantic entanglements could jeopardize the respect she'd worked hard to establish. And yet, as she finally gathered her things and walked back toward the schoolhouse, she couldn't deny the pleasant warmth that lingered from their conversation. The following days brought an unexpected cold snap, with frost appearing on the windows each morning and the creek developing a thin crust of ice along its edges. The schoolroom was chilly despite the wood stove that Rebecca kept carefully stoked throughout the day. Many children arrived with red noses and fingers, and Rebecca began each morning with warm cider that she prepared before they arrived. Sarah appeared one morning wearing a new woolen scarf, clearly handmade with somewhat uneven stitches. Did you make this yourself? Rebecca asked, admiring the bright red yarn. Pa helped me, Sarah said proudly. He said my ma used to knit all the time and he remembered some of what she did. We found her knitting needles in a trunk. It's beautiful work, Rebecca said, genuinely impressed. You have a good eye for color. Pa says red suits me because I'm so full of life, Sarah replied, twirling to make the ends of the scarf fly out. He's making a blanket too for when the baby comes. Rebecca paused in the act of writing the day's lessons on the chalkboard. Baby, Mrs. Jenkins' baby, Sarah clarified. She's having one in the spring, and Pa's on the committee to make sure they have everything they need, because Mr. Jenkins broke his leg last month and can't work proper. That's very thoughtful, Rebecca said, relieved for a reason she didn't want to examine too closely. Pa says a community looks after its own, Sarah recited, clearly quoting her father. Then she added in a confiding tone, he says you're one of our own now too, Miss Collins. Before Rebecca could respond to this interesting information, more students began arriving, and the day's lessons commenced. But throughout the day, Rebecca found herself distracted by Sarah's casual comment. The idea that Blake considered her one of their own was both comforting and confusing. Was it simply the town's acceptance of their new teacher, or did it suggest a more personal connection? That evening, as Rebecca was grading arithmetic assignments by lamplight, a knock at her door startled her. Visitors were rare, especially after dark. Cautiously, she approached the door. "Who is it?" she called. "Blake Harrington," came the reply. "Sorry to disturb you, Miss Collins." Rebecca quickly tidied her hair and smoothed her skirts before opening the door. Blake stood on the small porch, his hat in his hands and an apologetic expression on his face. "I apologize for the late call," he said immediately. "But I have a situation, and I was hoping you might be able to help." "Of course," Rebecca replied, concerned. "Is everything all right? Is Sarah well?" "Sarah's fine, physically at least," he assured her, "but she's a bit upset. There's been trouble with those rustlers I mentioned. I need to ride out with a posse tonight, and Mrs. Miller, who usually watches Sarah when I'm away, has taken ill." "You need someone to look after Sarah," Rebecca concluded. Blake nodded, looking relieved at her quick understanding. "Just for tonight. I wouldn't ask, but there's no one else available on such short notice who she'd be comfortable with." "I'd be happy to help," Rebecca said without hesitation. "Should I come to your home? Actually, I brought Sarah with me. She's waiting with my deputy out front." Blake gestured over his shoulder. "I thought it might be easier for you here with all your books and things to keep her entertained." "That's thoughtful, thank you." Rebecca was touched by his consideration. "Bring her in, please. I'll prepare the spare cot." While Blake went to fetch Sarah, Rebecca quickly arranged the small room off her bedroom, normally used for storage, making up a cot with fresh linens and placing a lamp on the small table. When she returned to the main room, Sarah was standing uncertainly by the door, a small carpet bag clutched in her hands and her eyes suspiciously red. "There now, Sarah, it's like a special school holiday," Rebecca said brightly. "We can read together and perhaps you can help me grade some of the younger children's work." Sarah nodded but looked unconvinced. When Blake knelt to say goodbye, she suddenly threw her arms around his neck. "Please don't go, Pa," she whispered. "The rustlers might hurt you." Blake held his daughter close, his strong hands gentle as they smoothed her hair. "I'll be fine, sweetheart. Sheriff's work isn't always convenient, but it's important. I'll be back before you know it." "Promise?" Sarah demanded, her face still buried in his shoulder. "Promise," he confirmed. "And Miss Collins will take good care of you until then." Sarah finally released her father and stepped back, attempting a brave face. "I'll be good, Pa. You always are," he said, kissing her forehead before rising to his full height. To Rebecca, he added in a lower voice, "Thank you for this. I should be back by morning." "We'll be fine," Rebecca assured him, feeling a surge of protectiveness toward both the worried father and his daughter. "Please be careful." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "That's becoming a habit with you, Miss Collins." After Blake left, Rebecca turned her attention to distracting Sarah from her worries. They prepared a simple supper together, with Sarah proudly demonstrating her knowledge of setting a proper table. Afterward, they sat by the warm stove, and Rebecca read aloud from the Swiss Family Robinson, a tale of adventure that soon had Sarah asking eager questions about shipwrecks and desert islands. When it was time for bed, Sarah became quiet again. As Rebecca tucked her into the cot, the girl looked up with serious eyes. "Pa's the bravest man in the territory," she said solemnly. "I believe he is," Rebecca agreed. "Ma used to worry when he went out at night," Sarah continued. "I remember her sitting by the window, waiting." "It must have been hard for her," Rebecca said gently. "Just as it's hard for you now," Sarah nodded. "Do you worry about him too, Miss Collins?" Rebecca hesitated, caught between honesty and propriety. "I worry about anyone facing danger," she finally said. "Especially someone as important to the town as your father." Sarah seemed to accept this answer, though something in her expression suggested she understood more than Rebecca had said aloud. Good night, Miss Collins. Good night, Sarah. Sleep well. Rebecca returned to her grading but found it difficult to concentrate. Her thoughts kept drifting to Blake, out in the darkness facing unknown dangers. The responsibility he carried for the town, for his daughter, for justice in this wild territory seemed an almost impossible burden for one man. Yet he bore it with quiet strength and unwavering determination. It was well after midnight when Rebecca finally retired to her own bed, leaving a lamp burning low in case Sarah woke during the night. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of gunfire and danger. Dawn was just breaking when a knock at the door roused Rebecca from a light sleep. She threw on a robe over her nightgown and hurried to answer, mindful not to wake Sarah. Blake stood there, looking exhausted but unharmed. His clothes were dusty, and there was a day's growth of beard darkening his jaw, but the smile he gave her was warm. "You're back safe," Rebecca said, relief washing over her. "Told you I would be," he replied, his voice low. "How's Sarah? Still asleep?" She was worried but brave, just like her father. Blake's expression softened at the mention of his daughter. "Thank you for looking after her. I hope she wasn't too much trouble." "Not at all. She's a wonderful child." Rebecca hesitated, then asked, "Were you successful with the rustlers?" "Caught 2 of them. The others escaped, but they won't be back anytime soon." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it slightly disheveled in a way that Rebecca found inexplicably appealing. "I need to get some sleep, but I wanted to collect Sarah first." "She can stay until she wakes naturally," Rebecca offered. "No sense disturbing her. I can bring her home once she's had breakfast." Blake considered the offer, clearly torn between his duty as a father and his physical exhaustion. "That's kind of you, but I don't want to impose further." "It's no imposition, truly." Rebecca surprised herself by reaching out to touch his arm briefly. "Get some rest, Blake. Sarah will be fine with me." He looked down at where her hand had touched him, then back to her face. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of understanding and connection that made Rebecca's breath catch. "All right," he finally agreed. "Our place is the small house behind the sheriff's office, the blue one with the porch swing." "I know it," Rebecca assured him. "We'll come by mid-morning." After Blake left, Rebecca found it impossible to return to sleep. Instead, she quietly dressed and prepared a special breakfast of griddle cakes with preserved berries. The activity helped distract her from analyzing the moment of connection she'd shared with Blake, and the growing certainty that her feelings for him were developing beyond mere admiration or friendship. Sarah woke in high spirits, especially when informed that her father had returned safely and that they would be having a special breakfast. She chattered happily about the books they'd read the night before, and how she planned to tell her father all about the Swiss family's ingenious solutions to island living. After breakfast, they walked together to the Harrington home, a modest but well-maintained house that reflected its owner's practical nature. The front yard was neat, with a small vegetable garden to one side and the promised porch swing hanging from sturdy chains. Sarah ran ahead, eager to confirm her father's safe return with her own eyes. Rebecca followed more slowly, suddenly uncertain about entering Blake's private domain. This was different from their casual encounters in town or their conversations by the creek. This was his home, his sanctuary. The front door opened before Sarah reached it, revealing Blake, now clean-shaven and dressed in fresh clothes, though still looking tired. He swept his daughter into a hug, lifting her off her feet as she squealed with delight. The picture they made the strong, serious lawman and his laughing daughter touched Rebecca deeply. "Pa, Miss Collins made griddle cakes with berries, and we read about a family who lived in a tree, and I helped grade spelling papers," Sarah reported breathlessly. "Sounds like you had quite an adventure," Blake replied, setting her down but keeping an arm around her shoulders. He looked up at Rebecca, who had stopped a respectful distance from the porch steps. "Won't you come in, Miss Collins? I've got coffee brewing." Rebecca hesitated. "I wouldn't want to intrude on your time with Sarah, especially after you've been away all night." "Please, Miss Collins," Sarah pleaded. "I want to show you my room. I have a collection of pretty rocks that Pa helps me find." With such earnest invitations from both Harringtons, Rebecca found herself unable to refuse. Well, perhaps for a little while. The interior of the house was simple but comfortable, with solid furniture, braided rugs on the wooden floors, and shelves lined with books and small treasures. Photographs in simple frames adorned the walls, many showing a younger Blake with a pretty dark-haired woman who must have been Sarah's mother. There were also newer images of Sarah at various ages. While Sarah eagerly showed Rebecca her rock collection, carefully arranged on a small shelf in her bedroom, Blake prepared coffee and set out cups on the kitchen table. "Your home is lovely," Rebecca commented when they rejoined him. "So warm and inviting." "Catherine had a way of making any place feel like home," Blake said, glancing at a photograph of his late wife that stood on the mantel. "I've tried to maintain that feeling for Sarah's sake." "You've succeeded," Rebecca assured him, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Sarah clearly feels secure and loved here." "Pa makes everything nice," Sarah agreed, climbing onto a chair at the table. "Except when he cooks," she added with a giggle. Blake chuckled. "My culinary skills are limited, I admit. You should taste Miss Collins's griddle cakes, Pa." "They're almost as good as Mrs. Miller's." "Almost?" Rebecca asked with mock offense. "Well, Mrs. Miller puts extra butter on top," Sarah explained seriously. "A critical oversight on my part," Rebecca acknowledged, smiling. Blake watched their exchange with an expression Rebecca couldn't quite decipher, something between amusement and wistfulness. "Sarah, why don't you go fetch that picture book you were telling me about, the one Miss Collins showed you about New York?" Once Sarah had scampered off, Blake turned to Rebecca. "I wanted to thank you properly, without little ears listening, not just for watching Sarah, but for how you handled her worries. Mrs. Miller mentioned that she gets frightened when I'm away on dangerous business." "She's understandably concerned for your safety," Rebecca said. "She loves you very much." "The feeling is mutual," Blake said softly. "She's everything to me." He hesitated, then added, "which is why it means so much that she's comfortable with you. Sarah doesn't warm to people easily." "I'm honored by her trust," Rebecca said sincerely. "She's a remarkable child." "Like her mother," Blake said automatically, then seemed to reconsider. "Though actually in many ways she reminds me of you, the same curiosity about the world, the same determination." The comparison caught Rebecca off guard, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm flattered you think so." Blake looked as though he might say more, but Sarah returned with her book, and the moment passed. They spent another pleasant hour together, with Sarah proudly showing her father the illustrations of New York City and Rebecca explaining the history behind various landmarks. When it was finally time for Rebecca to leave, Blake walked her to the door while Sarah remained absorbed in her book. "Thank you again," he said, his voice low, "for everything." "It was my pleasure," Rebecca replied honestly. "Sarah is a joy to be around." Blake nodded, then seemed to come to a decision. "Rebecca, I know this is forward of me, but would you consider joining us for supper sometime? Not as Sarah's teacher or as a favor to me, but as a friend." The hesitation before the word friend suggested he might have considered a different term, and Rebecca felt her pulse quicken. "I would like that very much," she answered, her voice steadier than she expected. "Good," he said, relief evident in his expression. "How about this Saturday? Nothing fancy, but I promise not to inflict my cooking on you. Mrs. Miller usually prepares extra food for us before her day off." "Saturday would be perfect," Rebecca agreed. As she walked back to the schoolhouse, her step was lighter than it had been in months. The days leading up to Saturday passed in a pleasant blur of teaching and anticipation. Rebecca found herself paying extra attention to her appearance each morning, though she told herself it was simply professional pride. Sarah seemed equally excited about the upcoming dinner, often mentioning it during class in ways that made Rebecca gently redirect her attention back to the lessons at hand. By Saturday afternoon, Rebecca was experiencing an uncharacteristic case of nerves as she selected her attire for the evening. After much deliberation, she chose a dress of deep burgundy that was more elegant than her teaching clothes, but not so formal as to seem inappropriate for a simple supper. She arranged her hair in a softer style than usual, with a few curls framing her face, and added a small cameo brooch at her collar, her grandmother's parting gift when she left Boston. The walk to Blake's house in the golden light of early evening helped calm her nerves. Willow Creek was peaceful at this hour, with most families already gathered around their supper tables and the saloon not yet bustling with its nighttime patrons. The mountains in the distance were tinged purple and orange by the setting sun, a sight that still filled Rebecca with wonder after months in Wyoming. When she arrived, Sarah answered the door wearing a freshly pressed dress and with ribbons in her hair. "You look pretty, Miss Collins," she said frankly. "Thank you, Sarah." "So do you," Rebecca replied, following the girl into the house. Blake emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a cloth. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance as well, wearing a clean white shirt with a dark vest and his hair neatly combed. When he saw Rebecca, he paused, his expression appreciative but respectful. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," Rebecca replied, suddenly shy. "I hope I'm not too early." "Your timing is perfect," Blake assured her. "I was just setting the table." "Sarah, would you help Miss Collins get settled while I finish up dinner?" was a far cry from Blake's self-deprecating warnings about his culinary abilities. The table was set with care, a vase of late-blooming wildflowers at its center. The meal itself, beef stew with fresh bread and apple pie for dessert, was simple but delicious. "I thought you said you couldn't cook," Rebecca teased as she accepted a second helping of stew. Blake looked slightly embarrassed. "Mrs. Miller left the stew, but I did manage the bread without burning it, which is progress." "Pa's learning," Sarah explained seriously. "He says a man should know how to feed himself and his family proper." "A sensible approach," Rebecca agreed. "Perhaps you could teach me some of what you've learned. My own cooking skills are rather limited to basic dishes." "Didn't your ma teach you?" Sarah asked with the directness of childhood. "Sarah," Blake warned gently, "that might be a personal question. It's all right," Rebecca assured him. "No, Sarah, my mother didn't cook. We had servants in our house in Boston who handled all the cooking and cleaning." Sarah's eyes widened. "Like in a castle," Rebecca laughed. "Not quite that grand, but my parents were fortunate enough to be able to afford help." "It means, however, that I never learned many practical skills. Teaching was my focus." "And you're excellent at that," Blake commented. "The town council's been very impressed with the progress the students are making under your guidance." The conversation flowed easily as they ate, touching on town news, school matters, and Blake's work as sheriff, the less dangerous aspects, Rebecca noted, likely for Sarah's benefit. After dinner, Sarah convinced them to play a card game, which resulted in much laughter as it became clear that Rebecca's privileged Boston upbringing had not included such entertainments. When Sarah began to yawn, Blake gently suggested it was bedtime. The girl protested only briefly before hugging Rebecca goodnight and allowing her father to escort her to her room. While Blake was gone, Rebecca took the opportunity to examine the photographs on the mantel more closely. Catherine Harrington had been beautiful, with dark hair and a warm smile. In one image, she stood beside Blake, both of them younger and laughing at something beyond the camera's view. They looked happy, completely in love, and Rebecca felt a momentary pang of something like jealousy, immediately followed by shame at such an unworthy emotion. "That was taken about a year before Sarah was born," Blake's voice said softly from behind her. Rebecca turned, embarrassed to be caught examining his personal mementos. "She was lovely." "Yes, she was," Blake agreed, joining her by the mantel. "Inside and out, she would have liked you, I think." "What makes you say that?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious. Blake considered the question. "Catherine valued education highly. She taught at a small school in Denver before we were married, and she had no patience for pretense or false sentiment, qualities I've noticed you share." The comparison was unexpected and touching. "Thank you for sharing that with me. It can't be easy talking about her." "It's gotten easier over time," Blake admitted. "For a while, I couldn't speak of her at all, especially to Sarah, but that wasn't fair to either of them. Catherine deserves to be remembered, and Sarah deserves to know about her mother." They were standing very close now, the intimate setting and conversation creating a sense of connection that made Rebecca acutely aware of him as a man, not just as the town sheriff or Sarah's father. The lamplight cast a warm glow across his features, softening the lines that responsibility and loss had etched there. "Would you like to sit on the porch for a while?" Blake suggested, gesturing toward the door. "It's a beautiful night." The porch swing creaked gently as they settled on it, a respectable distance between them. The night air was cool but not uncomfortable, fragrant with pine and sage. Stars crowded the vast Wyoming sky more than Rebecca had ever imagined possible. "I never tire of this view," she said, gazing upward. "In Boston, the buildings and gas lamps obscured most of the stars." "One advantage of frontier living," Blake agreed. "Though I imagine there are things you miss about city life," Rebecca considered this. "Bookshops," she decided. "And museums, concert halls, but those are just places and things. What I truly valued about Boston was the sense of possibility of ideas constantly circulating. I worried the West might feel intellectually isolating." "And does it?" Blake asked. "Less than I feared," Rebecca admitted. "There's a different kind of wisdom here, a practical philosophy born of necessity and close connection to the land, and people like you who value learning despite limited formal education." "You give me too much credit," Blake said with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm just a man trying to keep up with his precocious daughter." "You're more than that," Rebecca said softly, emboldened by the darkness and the intimacy of their conversation. "You're a good father, a respected lawman, a man of principle. The town is fortunate to have you." Blake turned to look at her directly, his expression serious. "And what about you, Rebecca? Are you fortunate to have found yourself in Willow Creek?" The question seemed to carry layers of meaning beyond the obvious. "Yes," she answered honestly, "more fortunate than I initially realized." The swing swayed gently as Blake shifted slightly closer to her. "I've been wanting to ask you something, but I wasn't sure if it would be appropriate." Rebecca's heart quickened. "What is it?" "The harvest dance is coming up in 2 weeks. I was wondering if you'd consider attending with me." He paused, then added quickly, "And Sarah, of course." "As friends." The addition of "as friends" and the mention of Sarah suggested he was being cautious, perhaps concerned about propriety or moving too quickly. Rebecca appreciated his consideration even as she felt a twinge of disappointment at the qualification. "I would be delighted to accompany you both," she replied warmly. "Though I should warn you, my dancing skills may not be up to frontier standards." Blake chuckled. "Trust me, Willow Creek's idea of dancing isn't exactly a Boston ballroom. You'll do fine." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, the swing moving gently beneath them as they gazed at the stars. When it was finally time for Rebecca to leave, Blake insisted on walking her back to the schoolhouse despite her protests that it wasn't necessary. "Necessary or not, it's what a gentleman does," he said firmly. "Besides, I'd like the company." The walk through the quiet town was pleasant, their conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. When they reached the schoolhouse, Rebecca turned to thank Blake for the evening. "I had a wonderful time," she said sincerely. "Thank you for inviting me." "The pleasure was ours," Blake replied. He hesitated, then added, "Rebecca, I want you to know how much I value your friendship. It's been important to us." The word friendship again, Rebecca noted, though his tone suggested deeper feelings left unspoken. She wondered if he was holding back out of respect for his late wife's memory, concern for Sarah's feelings, or simply uncertainty about her own sentiments. "I value it too, Blake," she replied softly, "very much." For a moment it seemed he might say more, or perhaps even bridge the small physical distance between them. Instead, he simply nodded, his eyes holding hers for a heartbeat longer than necessary before he bid her good night and turned to walk away. Rebecca watched him go, a mixture of emotions stirring within her. There was joy at the connection they were forming, apprehension about the complications such feelings could bring to her position in the town, and a growing certainty that whatever was developing between them was worth the risk. The days leading up to the harvest dance were filled with excitement throughout Willow Creek. The schoolchildren were especially enthused, and Rebecca incorporated the event into their lessons, having the younger students create autumn-themed decorations while the older ones researched harvest traditions from different cultures. Sarah took particular pride in helping, often staying after school to assist with the decorations. Her excitement about attending the dance with her father and Rebecca was palpable, and she spent much time speculating about what they would all wear and which dances they might perform. "Pa's been practicing," she confided to Rebecca one afternoon as they hung paper leaves from the schoolroom ceiling. "I saw him counting steps in the kitchen last night." The image of the serious sheriff practicing dance steps alone in his kitchen made Rebecca smile. "That's very dedicated of him." "He says he doesn't want to step on your toes," Sarah continued matter-of-factly, "and that a lady like you deserves a proper dance partner." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm at this indirect compliment. "Your father is very thoughtful." "He likes you a lot," Sarah said, with the straightforward perception of childhood. "He smiles more when you're around." Before Rebecca could formulate an appropriate response to this observation, the classroom door opened and Blake himself appeared, come to collect his daughter. From his expression, Rebecca suspected he might have overheard Sarah's last comment. "Ready to go, Sarah?" he asked, his tone casual though his eyes held a hint of embarrassment when they met Rebecca's. "Just finishing the last leaf, Pa," Sarah replied, oblivious to any adult discomfort. As Sarah gathered her things, Blake approached Rebecca. "I apologize if Sarah was being overly familiar," he said quietly. "She has a tendency to speak her mind." "No apology needed," Rebecca assured him. "It's a quality I admire in her. Honesty is important." Blake studied her face for a moment. "Yes, it is," he agreed. "In that spirit, I should confess that what she said is true. I do smile more when you're around." The directness of his statement caught Rebecca by surprise, and she felt a flush of pleasure spread through her. "I'm glad," she replied simply. "You have a wonderful smile. It should be seen more often." Something shifted in Blake's expression, a softening, a new openness. But before he could respond, Sarah bounded up to them, ready to leave. "See you tomorrow, Miss Collins," she called cheerfully as she took her father's hand. "Until tomorrow," Rebecca agreed, her eyes meeting Blake's once more before they departed. That brief exchange lingered in Rebecca's thoughts as she prepared for the harvest dance. She had chosen a dress of deep forest green, more elegant than her usual attire, but still appropriate for a country celebration. The bodice was fitted with a modest neckline trimmed in cream-colored lace, and the skirt fell in graceful folds from her waist. She arranged her hair in a style that was both practical and becoming, with soft curls framing her face and the rest secured at the nape of her neck. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with autumn leaves, dried cornstalks, and pumpkins decorating the normally austere space. Lanterns cast a warm glow over the proceedings, and a small group of local musicians provided lively tunes on fiddle, banjo, and harmonica. Rebecca arrived early, as was expected of the schoolteacher who had helped organize the event. She was arranging the refreshment table when Blake and Sarah entered. Sarah wore a pretty blue dress that brought out her eyes, her hair neatly braided with matching ribbons. Blake was handsomely attired in a dark suit, his sheriff's badge conspicuously absent, suggesting he was attending solely as a private citizen tonight. Sarah spotted Rebecca first and hurried over, exclaiming over her dress and the decorations. Blake followed more sedately, his eyes taking in Rebecca's appearance with clear appreciation. "You look beautiful," he said simply when he reached her side. "Thank you," Rebecca replied, equally direct. "As do you both, quite the handsome pair." Sarah beamed at the compliment, then was quickly distracted by the arrival of her school friends. With a hurried request for permission, she dashed off to join them, leaving Blake and Rebecca momentarily alone despite the growing crowd. "She's been counting the days," Blake commented, watching his daughter with a fond expression. "Barely slept last night from excitement." "Children do love celebrations," Rebecca agreed, though I suspect she wasn't the only one looking forward to tonight. Blake's gaze returned to her face, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No, she wasn't," he acknowledged. "I've been anticipating it as well." "Have you been practicing your dancing?" Rebecca asked lightly, recalling Sarah's revelation. A hint of color touched Blake's cheeks, confirming the story. Sarah has a tendency to exaggerate, he said, though his expression was more amused than embarrassed. But I may have brushed up on a few steps. It's been a while since I attended a social event like this. Well, I'm honored to be your partner for the evening, Rebecca said sincerely. As more townspeople arrived, the musicians struck up the first dance. It was a lively reel that involved multiple couples, and Blake gallantly offered his arm to lead Rebecca into the formation. Despite his concerns, he proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her through the steps with confidence and care. Sarah joined in as well, partnered with one of her school friends, her face alight with joy as she twirled and skipped through the patterns. Rebecca caught Blake watching his daughter several times, his expression a mixture of pride and wistfulness that suggested he was perhaps thinking of Catherine and how she would have enjoyed seeing their daughter in such a happy moment. The evening progressed pleasantly, with a variety of dances interspersed with refreshments and conversation. Rebecca was introduced to several community members she hadn't yet met, and she noticed with satisfaction how well-respected Blake was among his neighbors. People approached him with genuine warmth and regard, not merely the deference due to his position as sheriff. During a brief respite while Sarah was engaged in a children's game, Blake brought Rebecca a cup of the spiced cider being served. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked as they stood watching the festivities. "Very much," Rebecca replied honestly. "It's wonderful to see the community coming together like this." "Willow Creek takes its celebrations seriously," Blake agreed. "Winter can be long and hard out here. Moments like these help sustain people through the difficult times." "A wise perspective," Rebecca said. "In Boston, social events were often more about display and competition than true community." "One of the advantages of frontier life," Blake observed. "Shared hardship tends to strip away pretense." The musicians began tuning for another dance, this one a slower waltz. Blake set down his cup and turned to Rebecca with a questioning look. "May I have this dance, Miss Collins?" "I'd be delighted, Sheriff Harrington," she replied with a smile, accepting his outstretched hand. As Blake led her onto the floor, Rebecca was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, firm but respectful, and the slight roughness of his palm against her fingers. They moved together with surprising ease, as if they had danced many times before. "You dance very well for someone who needed to practice in his kitchen," Rebecca teased gently. Blake chuckled, the sound warm in the space between them. "Perhaps I had a particularly inspiring partner in mind." The simple compliment sent a pleasant warmth through Rebecca, and she found herself holding his gaze longer than was perhaps proper. Around them, other couples moved to the music, but for a moment it felt as if they were alone, connected by something deeper than the steps of a waltz. "Blake," Rebecca began, feeling suddenly bold. Miss Collins." Sarah's excited voice broke into the moment as she darted up to them. "Mrs. Peterson says they're going to cut the harvest cake now, and I can help serve if it's all right with you." Blake's hand lingered at Rebecca's waist for a second longer before he stepped back, breaking the dance. "Of course it's all right," he told his daughter. "Just be careful not to drop any." As Sarah scampered off again, Blake turned back to Rebecca with an apologetic smile. "You were saying?" The moment had passed and Rebecca's courage with it. "Nothing important," she assured him. "We should probably join the others for cake." The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur of dancing, conversation, and laughter. As the celebration wound down, families began to depart, children drowsy from excitement and late hours. Sarah, too, was beginning to fade, leaning against her father's side with increasingly heavy eyelids. "I think someone's ready to call it a night," Rebecca observed fondly. "Past ready," Blake agreed, smoothing a hand over his daughter's hair. "Would you allow us to escort you home first?" The walk to the schoolhouse was peaceful, with Sarah between them, occasionally yawning but insisting she wasn't tired at all. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Above them, stars crowded the sky, their light undimmed by city glare. At the schoolhouse door, Sarah surprised Rebecca with a sleepy hug. "This was the best dance ever," she declared. wasn't it, Pa? Certainly the best I can recall, Blake agreed, his eyes meeting Rebecca's over his daughter's head. I had a wonderful time as well, Rebecca said sincerely. Thank you both for your company. Sarah released her and stepped back to her father's side, leaning against him tiredly. Blake hesitated, then said, Sarah, why don't you wait for me at the bottom of the steps? I'll be right there. Once his daughter had moved away, Blake turned to Rebecca. I wanted to thank you properly for the evening. Your company meant a great deal to both of us. The pleasure was mine, Rebecca replied. Truly? Blake seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Finally, he said, Rebecca, I've been meaning to ask if you might consider joining us for Sunday dinner after church tomorrow. Nothing formal, just a simple meal together. The invitation, coming so soon after tonight's event, suggested a deepening of their connection, and Rebecca felt a surge of joy at the prospect. I would love that, she answered without hesitation. Relief and happiness crossed Blake's features. Good, that's good. He glanced toward Sarah, who was fighting to keep her eyes open. I should get her home before she falls asleep standing up. Of course, Rebecca agreed. Good night, Blake. Good night, Rebecca. He held her gaze for a moment longer, then with a final smile, turned to join his daughter. As Rebecca prepared for bed that night, she reflected on the evening with a sense of quiet happiness. Something was changing between her and Blake, a shifting from friendship toward something deeper and more meaningful. The realization was both exhilarating and slightly terrifying. She had come west to establish herself as a teacher, not to find romance, yet she couldn't deny the growing feelings in her heart, and there was Sarah to consider as well. The girl had clearly formed an attachment to Rebecca, one that could be complicated by a romantic relationship with her father. If things didn't work out between them, it wouldn't just be their hearts at risk, but Sarah's as well. Yet despite these concerns, Rebecca fell asleep with a smile on her lips, her dreams filled with waltzes and a pair of kind blue eyes. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, with frost patterns decorating the schoolhouse windows. Rebecca dressed carefully for church, selecting a navy blue dress with a modest white collar, appropriate for both the service and the dinner to follow. As she walked to the small church at the center of town, she acknowledged to herself that her anticipation had less to do with religious devotion and more with the prospect of seeing Blake and Sarah again. The church was already filling when she arrived, and she spotted Blake and Sarah in their usual pew near the front. Sarah saw her immediately and waved enthusiastically, causing several heads to turn. Blake's greeting was more restrained but no less warm, his eyes lighting up when they met hers. Rebecca took a seat on the same pew, leaving a respectable distance between herself and the Harringtons, though Sarah promptly scooted closer to share her hymnal. Throughout the service, Rebecca was acutely aware of Blake's presence beside his daughter, his deep voice joining the congregations in the hymns, his attentive posture during the sermon. After the service, as the congregation filed out, many people stopped to exchange greetings and bits of news. Rebecca found herself drawn into several conversations about the school and the success of the harvest dance. When she finally managed to make her way out of the church, she found Blake and Sarah waiting patiently for her on the steps. "Ready for dinner?" Blake asked, offering his arm with a smile. The simple domestic scene that greeted Rebecca at the Harrington home table set for three, a savory aroma coming from the kitchen, felt surprisingly right, as if she belonged there. Sarah immediately took charge of showing Rebecca where to hang her coat and hat, chattering about how she had helped set the table with the good dishes and folded the napkins, just like Mrs. Miller taught me. Dinner was roast chicken with vegetables and fresh bread, simple but delicious. The conversation flowed naturally, touching on the morning's sermon, school matters, and town news. Rebecca found herself relaxing completely, enjoying the warm family atmosphere and the easy companionship. After the meal, Sarah went to play outside with a neighbor's child, leaving Blake and Rebecca alone to clean up. As they worked side by side, washing and drying dishes, Rebecca was struck by the comfortable domesticity of the scene. It was a far cry from the formal dinners of her Boston upbringing, with servants handling all such tasks behind the scenes. "You're smiling," Blake observed as he handed her another plate to dry. Something amusing, not amusing exactly, Rebecca replied. I was just thinking how different this is from meals in my parents' house. Everything there was so formal, so constrained by propriety and social expectations. This is nicer. Blake considered this as he rinsed another dish. I imagine there are advantages to both ways of living. Your parents' way probably involved a lot less dishwashing for the family. Rebecca laughed. True enough, but also less conversation, less connection. She hesitated, then added, growing up, I rarely saw my parents so relaxed and natural, especially my father. There was always a certain distance. That's a shame, Blake said quietly. Family should be where you're most yourself, not where you have to maintain the most appearances. I agree, Rebecca said. It's one of the things I admire about your relationship with Sarah, how honest and open it is. Blake smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in his expression. After Catherine died, I realized how precious time with loved ones truly is. It seemed foolish to waste any of it on pretense. They finished the dishes in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Afterward, Blake suggested they take coffee on the porch to enjoy the crisp autumn afternoon. They settled onto the swing, mugs in hand, watching Sarah and her friend playing an elaborate game of make-believe in the yard. She seems so happy here, Rebecca observed. So secure. That's all I've wanted for her, Blake admitted. A stable home, a sense of belonging. After Catherine died, I worried I wouldn't be enough for her, that she needed a mother's influence. You've done a remarkable job, Rebecca assured him. She's bright, confident, kind-hearted, everything a parent hopes for in a child. Blake turned to look at her directly. Thank you for saying that. Your opinion means a great deal to me. There was something in his voice, an undercurrent of emotion that made Rebecca's heart beat faster. Blake, she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that something significant was happening between them. I've been thinking a lot about us, Blake said quietly, his eyes holding hers, about what might be possible. So have I, Rebecca admitted. It's unexpected. I didn't come west looking for this, she gestured vaguely between them. Nor did I expect to find it, Blake agreed. After Catherine, I thought that part of my life was over, that Sarah would be my only focus. And now, Rebecca asked, hardly daring to breathe. Blake set his coffee mug aside and reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. Now I find myself thinking of possibilities I'd given up on, of a future that includes more than just duty and responsibility. Rebecca looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. I've been cautious, she confessed. Teaching is my calling, and I was afraid that personal attachments might interfere with that. I understand caution, Blake said. I've practiced it myself, but Rebecca, Miss Collins, look what we found. Sarah's voice interrupted as she came running toward the porch, something clutched in her hands. Blake reluctantly released Rebecca's hand as his daughter approached. What have you got there, sweetheart? A bird's nest. Sarah exclaimed, carefully opening her cupped hands to reveal a small, intricately woven nest. It fell from the big tree, but there's no eggs or baby birds in it, so we can keep it, right? I suppose so, Blake agreed. It's a robin's nest by the look of it. They won't be using it again. Can we keep it on the bookshelf in the parlor? Sarah asked eagerly. It's so pretty with all the different things woven in. Why don't you put it on the shelf in your room? Blake suggested. That way you can show it to your friends when they visit. Sarah considered this, then nodded decisively. Good idea, Pa, I'll go do that right now. She darted into the house, leaving Blake and Rebecca alone again. She has impeccable timing, Blake observed with a rueful smile. The privilege of childhood, Rebecca replied, feeling a mixture of disappointment and relief at the interruption. Whatever Blake had been about to say, whatever step they had been about to take, perhaps it was better to proceed with caution after all. The moment passed, and their conversation shifted to more general topics as they finished their coffee. When it was time for Rebecca to leave, Blake walked her to the gate, Sarah having become engrossed in arranging her new treasure in her bedroom. Thank you for joining us today, Blake said, his hand resting lightly on the gate beside hers. It meant a lot to both of us. Thank you for inviting me, Rebecca replied. It was a lovely afternoon. Blake hesitated, then said, "Rebecca, about what I was saying earlier. I don't want to rush you or make you uncomfortable, but I hope you know that my feelings for you are sincere." The simple, straightforward declaration touched her deeply. "I know," she said softly, "and mine for you. It's just that it's complicated," Blake finished for her. "I understand. We both have responsibilities, priorities. Sarah's well-being is paramount to me." "As it should be," Rebecca agreed quickly. "She's a wonderful child, and I would never want to disrupt the security you've created for her." Blake nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps we should simply allow ourselves time to see where this leads without pressure or expectations." "I think that's wise," Rebecca said, relieved at his understanding. "Time to be certain of our feelings and how they fit with our other commitments." "Then that's what we'll do," Blake agreed. He reached out to touch her hand briefly. "Until tomorrow, Rebecca." "Until tomorrow," she echoed, reluctantly turning to walk away, her heart full of complex emotions that would require careful examination in the quiet of her rooms. The weeks that followed took on a gentle rhythm. Rebecca's days were filled with teaching, her growing connection with the schoolchildren bringing deep satisfaction. The approaching winter meant shorter days and colder temperatures, but the schoolroom remained warm and bright, a haven of learning and discovery. Blake and Rebecca continued to see each other regularly, though always in contexts that could be considered proper and appropriate. He often walked her home from church on Sundays, sometimes accompanied by Sarah, sometimes alone if his daughter was invited to a friend's house. They attended town events together, and occasionally Blake would stop by the schoolhouse after classes to discuss some community matter, though they both knew the conversation would inevitably extend beyond official business. By unspoken agreement, they did not discuss what was developing between them, allowing their connection to grow naturally without forcing definitions or expectations. But Rebecca was aware of the subtle changes in their interactions, the lingering glances, the way Blake would find reasons to touch her hand or arm briefly, the increasing ease and intimacy of their conversations. Sarah, with a child's perception, seemed to understand that something special was happening between her father and teacher. She often found ways to bring them together, suggesting activities that would include all three of them or conveniently remembering important school matters that required Rebecca's presence at their home. One crisp November afternoon, as Rebecca was tidying the classroom after the day's lessons, she was surprised to see Sarah burst through the door, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. "Miss Collins, you have to come quick," the girl exclaimed, slightly out of breath. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Rebecca asked, immediately concerned. "Is your father all right?" "Pa's fine," Sarah assured her. "But you need to come to our house right away. It's important." "What's happened?" Rebecca pressed, reaching for her coat and hat. Sarah's expression turned mysteriously pleased. "It's a surprise. You'll see when we get there." Intrigued and slightly confused, Rebecca allowed herself to be led through town to the Harrington home. Sarah fairly skipped with excitement, refusing to offer further explanation despite Rebecca's gentle questioning. When they reached the house, Sarah threw open the front door and announced loudly, "We're here, Pa. I brought Miss Collins just like you said." Blake emerged from the kitchen, and Rebecca was startled to see him wearing an apron over his usual clothes, a smudge of what looked like flour on his cheek. "Sarah, I told you to invite Miss Collins for dinner, not to drag her here with no explanation," he said, though his tone was more amused than scolding. "But you said it was a surprise," Sarah protested. "If I explained, it wouldn't be a surprise anymore." Blake shook his head with a fond smile. "Your logic is impeccable as always." He turned to Rebecca with a slightly sheepish expression. "I apologize for my daughter's enthusiasm. I had intended to extend a proper invitation for dinner this evening." "What's the surprise?" Rebecca asked, curiosity overcoming her momentary confusion. Sarah bounced on her toes. "Pa's cooking, all by himself. He's been practicing for weeks, and Mrs. Miller says he's finally ready to cook a real dinner without help." Blake's expression was a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "It's not fancy, just a simple stew and biscuits, but I thought." Well, you mentioned wanting to improve your own cooking skills, and I've been working on mine, so perhaps we could learn together. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Rebecca deeply. That he had been practicing for weeks, presumably with this moment in mind, suggested a level of commitment to their relationship that went beyond casual friendship. I would love that, she said sincerely, removing her hat and coat. Though I should warn you, my culinary skills are truly minimal. I may be more hindrance than help. Pa says cooking is like building a fence, Sarah informed her seriously. You just need the right tools and someone to show you how. Rebecca laughed. A practical philosophy I approve. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the scent of simmering stew. Blake had clearly been working for some time. Ingredients were arranged neatly on the table. A pot bubbled gently on the stove, and a bowl of biscuit dough waited nearby. Sarah, why don't you set the table while Miss Collins and I finish the biscuits? Blake suggested. Can I use the blue plates? The ones that were Ma's, Sarah asked. Blake hesitated only briefly. Yes, those would be perfect. As Sarah bustled off to the dining room, Blake turned to Rebecca. I hope this isn't presumptuous. I know it was a bit unorthodox the way Sarah brought you here. It's lovely, Rebecca assured him. Truly. I'm touched that you remembered my interest in learning to cook. Well, I can't claim to be an expert, Blake admitted, gesturing toward the stove, but I've mastered a few basics, enough to keep us fed at least. That's more than I can say, Rebecca replied with a self-deprecating smile. My attempts at biscuits could be used as doorstops, Blake chuckled. Then we'll start there. Biscuits are simple enough once you get the feel of the dough. He guided her through the process, showing her how to cut the lard into the flour, add just enough milk, and handle the dough gently to keep the biscuits light. His instructions were clear and patient, and Rebecca found herself enjoying the process despite her initial trepidation. As they worked side by side, Rebecca was acutely aware of Blake's proximity, the warmth of his body when he leaned close to demonstrate a technique, the brush of his fingers against hers as they shaped the biscuits. The simple domesticity of the scene felt intimate in a way that their previous encounters had not. You have a natural touch, Blake commented as Rebecca successfully cut out a perfectly shaped biscuit. Sure you haven't done this before? Quite sure, Rebecca laughed. But I have an excellent teacher. Their eyes met over the floury table, and something shifted in the atmosphere between them, a recognition of deeper feelings, a mutual acknowledgement of what had been developing over these past months. Rebecca, Blake began softly, Miss Collins. The table's all ready, and I found the good napkins too, Sarah called from the dining room. The moment broke, but the connection remained, a tangible thing that hummed between them as they finished preparing the meal. Dinner was a success, the stew flavorful and the biscuits golden and light. Sarah dominated the conversation with stories from school and questions about Rebecca's life in Boston, seemingly oblivious to the meaningful glances exchanged by the adults. After dinner, as they sat in the parlor with cups of hot cider, Sarah suddenly yawned widely, prompting Blake to suggest it might be bedtime. But I'm not tired, Sarah protested unconvincingly. And Miss Collins hasn't told us about the book she's reading yet. It will keep until tomorrow, Blake assured her. School comes early and Miss Collins probably has lessons to prepare for the morning. With reluctance, Sarah agreed to go to bed, first giving Rebecca a warm hug. Thank you for helping with dinner. Pa's happier when you're here, she whispered before pulling away. Once Sarah was upstairs, a comfortable silence fell between Blake and Rebecca. The parlor was warm and cozy, lit by the soft glow of oil lamps and the flickering fire in the small hearth. She's right, you know, Blake said finally, his voice low. I am happier when you're here.